know to be right. We believe in freedom. We believe in the rule of law. And we believe that an aggressor cannot invade its neighbour with impunity. And that conference is why we stand shoulder to shoulder with those brave Ukrainians defending their homeland. And Britain has to have the strategic endurance to see this through until their victory. Back in February this year, at the United Nations, I said that if Putin was foolish enough to attempt to invade Ukraine, the Ukrainians would defend their country ferociously. And they have done just that. Their bravery and passion have been amplified by the arms and the training that the UK has supplied. And we will support them until this war is won. We will support them until their territorial integrity is restored. And we will support them until the last Russian tank is dragged away by the last Ukrainian tractor. We need to have the strategic endurance to see this through to the end. Because if we don't, we send a message to every potential aggressor that our resolve is fragile. And we cannot, we must not, we will not send that message out into the world. And if you are listening to this speech, Mr. Putin, or Mr. Lavrov, let me be clear. We will never recognise the annexation of Luhansk, or Donetsk, or Kherson, or Zaporizhzhia, or Crimea.
Well, that was James Cleverly there, our Foreign Secretary, among other things, starting his speech by praising Boris Johnson's premiership, reinforcing his support for Liz Truss, and reinforcing his commitment to the people of Ukraine.
Also trying to, I think in many ways...
Well, hello there. It is 6 o'clock. It's just gone, actually, 10 past. If you are clock watching tonight, that was James Cleverly you were just listening to. Before that, Suella Braverman there taking to the stage. So I think we have lots to discuss. First up, though, what I want to get into is the benefit row that has been raging within the Tories. I'll cut to the chase and ask you this tonight. Should benefits rise in line with inflation or with average wages? Tell me where you stand on that. Also, the COVID inquiry has started today. What do you think it's going to tell us? Did our government deal with the crisis well or not? What do you reckon? And when we talk about channel crossings, which Suella Braverman was just saying is a chronic issue, how are we going to resolve it? She was talking very tough, I can tell you, but I could almost hear the lawyers groaning in my ears as she was speaking, shouting at the screen. I bet some of them were, that it's not achievable, many of her plans. So talk is easy, isn't it? Very cheap, some might say. But do you think she's going to be able to see her plans through? Get in touch with me. Tell me your thoughts on all of that. And keeping me company right through until 7 o'clock tonight to give me their thoughts is my panel. We have the former Special Advisor advisor to Boris Johnson in number 10, and also the Secretary of State for Wales, Jack Sellers, and also Andrew Harrop, the General Secretary of the Fabian Society. Good evening, gentlemen.
Evening.
New
Hello.
face.
Hi,
We
Michelle.
always love a new face on Dewbs & Co. You're very welcome. And you also know how it works at home by now, don't you? You can get in touch on email at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews if that is your thing. So, shall we just get straight into it? Benefits. You know, this is a row that has been raging, well, it will be raging on and on and on. And it all boils down to a simple question. Should benefits be raised by inflation or by the average wage? That was my question to you at the start. I'm going to throw it to you, Jack. Where do you stand on it?
Well, there's two aspects to this, really, Michelle. And I can tell you what I think will happen. Because personally, I don't see how Liz Truss can't sort of follow through with this. You know, this was pledged under the Boris Johnson government from Boris and Rishi Sunak. I know that she hasn't actually ruled it out yet, but she's indicated that that's not the sort of route she's going down. But
you're talking about it rising with inflation.
Rising with inflation, yeah. But already today we've seen, you know, Robert Buckland and Penny Mordaunt, two of her cabinet members, sort of coming out against this. But I honestly think that we would be having a much more different discussion right now if we hadn't had the mini-budget the last few weeks. And the reason for that is because in the mini-budget, obviously a lot of the criticism that's come out from the Conservative ranks and elsewhere, and some of the economic meltdown that came, was because a lot of these tax cuts and promises in the mini-budget were all unfunded. So what Liz Truss was effectively came out and said, and Kwasi Kwarteng effectively said, was we'll pledge these tax cuts for the, you know, the wealthy, the top income tax band, abolishing that band, first of all, which obviously is U-turn now. But what she was saying is, I don't know where the money is, but I will do these things. And now we're in a position where everyone's calling, a lot of people are calling for benefits to rise with inflation. And there's not an argument anymore for Liz Truss to say that, well, I can't do this because it's not economically prudent or whatever, because that whole argument has been demolished over the past few weeks from the mini-budget. So I feel like she's in a sort of bit of a crosshairs, really, with, one, her own party, who aren't going to let her slip away from this, but also I think the general public won't sit by and let her sort of also not go ahead of it, which was promised.
Andrew, your thoughts?
I think we need to go back to the spring when benefits were last increased. They went up by about 3-4% when inflation was at 10%. And at the time, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak said, it's all right, don't worry, because it will catch up. So what will happen is that next April 2023, you'll see the inflation measure of today in your benefits then. And in the meantime, they had some short-term emergency help for this winter. So that was the deal. Benefits not going up with line with inflation at the moment, but that money was to come. And what's happening now is the new Conservative administration has just ripped that deal up. And this really matters because we're talking about people with the lowest amounts of money who need to spend on food and fuel. And those are the things that are rising in price fastest. We're not talking about families with lots of spare money when things go wrong. Some of the lowest, the people with the lowest incomes in the country get £80 a week for all their living costs, for their bills, for their food, for their clothes. To say to them, we've got all those prices massively increasing, but you can't have any extra money to reflect that.
And those people,
it's just not fair.
Those people that you're quoting are on that kind of income range. What are those people? Are they people that are in work? Are they purely just on benefits? What's the profile of those people?
Yeah, so universal credit, the new benefit, basically goes to both families in work and those who aren't working. So it's topping up low pay when people aren't working that many hours a week, but it's also people who usually for good reasons aren't able to work. So there are some people who are unemployed and looking for work, but most of the people getting that money are either disabled or they're caring for kids or they're caring for sick relatives.
But I thought the disability payments, it was in law actually that the disability payments had to increase with inflation. So my understanding of it was that the disability side of things was taken care of in terms of increases with inflation. I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So I thought the disability side of this was almost separate. So we're more talking about the broader, the universal credit pool, excluding the disability side.
So lots of people who are disabled, they get this main benefit, universal credit, and that's the one that there's no protection of whatsoever. It's also been not rising in line with inflation or wages for years and years and years. So it's been getting lower and lower in terms of how much money you can use on it. And we've reached breaking point. And that's why we have food banks. That's why we have so many people who, even though they're getting the benefits they're entitled to, cannot make ends meet. And this will just go from bad to worse.
So your take is that absolutely benefits should rise with inflation?
Absolutely.
Is yours the same take, that they should rise with inflation?
I think they will rise with inflation, but
Do you think they should?
If we were in a world where the mini-budget hadn't happened,
Yeah.
my actual opinion would be I think the Conservatives would be in a much better place to have a discussion about whether rising benefits with inflation is the best way of achieving the outcomes that we want, in line with, not actually exacerbating inflation itself. So, for example...
But where we are today, because the mini-budget did happen, so my question is, do you think that the benefits should rise with inflation or average wage?
Yeah, I do. I actually do, because just because this is what we've pledged to people. Boris Johnson pledged it, Rishi Sunak pledged it.
So you're both on the fence that benefits should rise in line with inflation? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
So my question to you, because there will be people at home that work that don't claim universal credit, and by the way, I do realise that there are some people in low-paid wages that do claim universal credit. So I'm not trying to suggest that everyone on universal credit isn't working, but there will be people. I know I can see my inbox flashing already that work incredibly hard. Perhaps they might be just on the threshold of universal credit, just for whatever reason they don't qualify or whatever. They will not have inflation-meeting pay rises. And they will be shouting at the screen, shouting at you too probably, no offence, saying this isn't fair. Why should somebody on benefits essentially not be out of pocket when people that work will be?
So people on benefits have nothing to give. They have nothing left in their budgets that they can find when the prices go up. They've also been suffering year after year cuts in their living standards because for years benefits have not been keeping up with wages and inflation. So this is the one time for a decade when they're going to see their uplift higher than those in low-paid work. It's really unusual, but it's a protection. And we're doing this for pensioners. We're doing this for pensioners who rely on the state pension.
Yeah, the triple lock.
The triple lock.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between doing it for people under the age of 66 who are disabled, who are carers, who are mums looking after children?
But this is where I'm getting slightly confused, because it's my understanding that the carers allowance, the disability side of things, there was a legal obligation that those things had to line with inflation. So to me, you're mentioning carers, but I thought the care allowance was in line with inflation.
So this is an insane complexity of the benefit system. An awful lot of those carers and disabled people are getting universal credit, which is the main benefit, which goes to about 6 million people. And that's the one the big controversy is about.
Right. So you think it is fair that the people that go to work that don't qualify for benefits will essentially be out of pocket, and this time around the benefit recipients will not be?
This time around, because they are under such pressure to pay bills rising.
To you, the fairness question?
Well, for me, I think your viewers would be more surprised, maybe me coming from working in a Conservative government over the last 2.5 years, that maybe I've got this view, but I'm just dealing with the realities we have in front of us right now, the political realities in front of us. And I know just even before I came online that David Frost himself, one of the most right-wing, obviously, House of Lords members, but a member of the government of the past few years, been prolific in UK government, would be, a lot of your viewers will support David Frost, but even he's come out and said that it should rise with inflation. That's just because I accept the reality, and I think a lot of other people do, of the realities of where the government is right now and the political capital they have. This is a battle they're not going to win, unfortunately. They've already pledged this, and last week they were pledging, tax cuts for millionaires. I'm just arguing the lines which are going to be used against us, which are going to be used against Conservative members of Parliament over the next 2 years. Or you voted for bankers' bonuses to be scrapped, but you voted against benefits going up in line with inflation. So it's just going to cause absolute chaos for us as a party.
What I'm hearing from you is you're saying you agree with it purely because of a fairness perspective. You're saying you think it should happen basically for the political wellness of the Tory party going forward.
So if you wanted, what would I prefer? In an ideal world, what would I prefer? I actually think there'd be an argument if the Conservatives had more political capital on this, and we hadn't done the mini budget we've just done with the economic consequences it caused. I actually think there'd be an argument of we could look at whether more Rishi Sunak-style targeted interventions across the board would help people through this sort of period, because all the projections up until recently were saying that inflation was meant to come down next year. For me, putting benefits up in line with inflation, if inflation's coming back down next year, that's going to be something very hard to take away from them people when it comes to next year, as politically controversial as that is right now. But next year, when the inflation does come down, are the Conservatives going to be in a position to say, well, benefits need to be cut again now because inflation's back down, the cost of living has gone down? It's just going to cause problems. So I don't think in the whole it would be the best solution. I would rather look at targeted solutions, which Rishi Sunak sort of introduced, but like I say, we are where we are, unfortunately, and I think this is where David Frost is coming from.
I want your views on this at home. gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. Where do you stand on this? See, I've got to say, this is very unusual for me, but I am kind of on the fence with this one. The reason being, I can see both sides of this argument. My inbox is lighting up as we speak with people saying, I go to work, I'm working, and I'm, struggling, I'm going under here, and I'm not getting the help that I need. And those people are having a dent to their living experiences, their outgoings and all the rest of it. And I do believe, and I am a passionate believer in this, I passionately believe in the welfare state for those people that physically cannot work. Yeah. So if you've got a disability, if you physically cannot go to work, I truly believe that we should support you. Where I struggle is the people that physically can go to work and just quite frankly can't be bothered. I struggle with those people kind of benefiting more than somebody in work. And when we come to this whole political capital side of things, I struggle to fathom why Kwasi Kwarteng or whoever it is that's been advising him, I know these politicians are surrounded by people like yourselves, Jack. I don't understand how people can be so dim, quite frankly, as to think it is a good idea to stand up when we've got this living crisis situation and to stand up and put forward the proposed 45 pence cut, which, by the way, I think is a great policy. I think that's a great policy. But the timing of it is just so dim. Yeah. Because you're now sitting there arguing about, you've got people, to your point, people needing food banks, and then you've just completely undermined your own ability to be able to communicate properly, advance properly, by doing that policy at that point in time. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I completely agree with all your views about, why should workers be struggling? But we've got to remember, and the inflation, the benefits rising with inflation, this also impacts people who are working. There are people who are working on these low incomes who. So there's a bit of a sort of mixed battle in my head on this. But going back to your point about the timing of all the policies, I completely agree. I think so many of your viewers will have looked at the mini budget. I did. I looked at the mini budget and I thought there is lots in there which I like. This is changing up the economic system we've got in the country. But was it the right time to do it? When on the same day you're announcing a huge cost of living package, huge, which no one is talking about now, by the way, because it's been completely overshadowed by all the negative stuff in there. You didn't need to do it then. You could have, for me, if I was advising Liz Truss and going into this government, I would have said, into government, deal with cost of living first. That's the main thing on people's minds. And announce the energy package, then deal with these questions about benefits, should they rise with inflation, should we do targeted measures, whatever. Tackle that, and then in the new year, well, imagine a conference then, come up to conference, you've dealt with all that stuff, come up to conference and talk about your tax plans into the future, a positive vision, how you're going to cut things. That would have been the right way to do it, but pounding it all into one and just, completely distorting the whole economic market, it's ruined. It's for us as Conservatives, it's frustrating. It must be frustrating for David Frost of this world and others who they've believed in these policies for years, and now they've been completely undone just because they were rushed and they weren't thought through and they weren't communicated properly. Yeah, I do. I find it unfathomable. I know you want to come in.
For people like me on the left of politics to see...
Well, this must be your dream.
It's my nightmare. We're seeing with the U-turn...
No, for you, as on the left...
The 45p cut reversal is good news, but in the same mini-budget, all the other tax changes benefited the rich as well.
Why is it good news?
Because what you're seeing is a set of tax policies designed to benefit not just the people who are doing quite well, but the really rich the super rich, the very, very affluent, earning over £100,000 or £200,000 a year. And although this U-turn has watered that effect down, even the tax changes that have survived are still incredibly unfair, benefiting the rich and not people on ordinary incomes.
What's unfair? Which ones remain that are unfair, in your mind?
So to have the removal of the national insurance rise for the high earners just doesn't make sense at this time. So I do agree that it was the wrong policy for people on ordinary earnings, but to take a tax away from high earners when we're struggling so much as a country, and back to our conversation about benefit cuts, to think, shall I have a benefit cut for people with no money left, or shall I reduce taxes next year for high earners? It just seems like crazy priorities.
Yeah, but then there'll be people shouting at the screen going, hang on a second, when you're talking about the national insurance rises, that in the main part was supposed to be going into things like the NHS, many higher earners have private health insurance. So they would argue that actually their burden on the National Health Service is less. So why shouldn't they benefit from that reduction?
Because they're a group of people who are not being hit so much by prices rising and have got spare money that, they're putting away in savings, while, sort of people on low and ordinary incomes are really struggling with inflation and energy costs and can't find the extra money they need to pay those vital bills.
Well, there you go. Tell me your thoughts at home. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm running a Twitter poll on this as well, by the way, if Twitter is your thing. I'm asking you, where do you stand on it? Benefits, should they rise in line with inflation or wages? I'm squinting my eyes to see 66% of you right now saying wages. 30-odd% of you saying inflation. Lynn says, Michelle, I'm on benefits, but I don't agree that I should be awarded a higher increase than someone who's working. Elizabeth says, let them be increased by the amount of the average wage. To do anything else would not be fair to the average wage earners. I have to say that is the sense that is coming through, that people believe that it should be in line with the average wage. But then what would you say to the points that you've just been hearing there? Andrew was basically saying that the people at the very bottom of society, they don't have a penny to spare. He's suggesting, that if you are working, maybe you do. So that might be one of the reasons to try and bring benefits in line. Does it wash with you or not? Tell me. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email address. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll have some more of your thoughts on that. And also, I want to move on to COVID. Do you remember it all? We'll soon be reminded in Technicolor, because the COVID inquiry finally got underway today. What do you think it's going to show? You're not going to get the answer anytime soon, though, I can tell you, because it's going to take years. But what do you reckon it's going to conclude? Did our government do a good job of the COVID crisis or not? Tell me, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, and my panel tonight. We've got the former Special Advisor to Boris Johnson. He was also the former Advisor to Secretary of State for Wales, Jack Sellers, and Andrew Harrop, the General Secretary of the Fabian Society. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hello.
John from Manchester has been in touch, basically saying Dewbs is a disgrace when it comes to her view of people on benefits. John says he gets the impression that I would want to scrap the benefit system. John, let me correct you, my friend. That's not true at all. I think you must have missed me saying the exact opposite, which is I am absolutely in favour of a welfare safety blanket for those people that absolutely need it, for people who cannot physically go out to work. We absolutely should be doing everything in our power to help support them. For those people that have to stay at home and care for others, we absolutely should be there to support them. But for anyone else that is physically able, I absolutely do believe that they should be going out to work. And I make no apology for that. Right, let's move on then, shall we, for COVID. Here we go. And I say here we go because, my friends, we're going to be hearing about this for a very long time to come. Years and years. In fact, what am I talking about? Well, the public inquiry into the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's get to the bottom of it, shall we? It is going to be broken up into a few different parts, but long story short, it's going to look at absolutely everything, all the different components from our planning through to how we did all of it in a nutshell. Where do you stand on it? Do you think that the government, on the whole, did a good job of managing the COVID response or not?
I think there were good moments and there were bad moments. I mean, it was an extraordinary time that, you know, the country had never faced a situation like that before. The broad thrust of what the government did by locking down the country to save lives was correct, but there were some big mistakes along the way. There was no resilience in our health service and lots of other public services, which meant we couldn't cope when that first wave of the pandemic came. We probably locked down too late, and tens of thousands of people probably died as a result of that, not listening to the science soon enough. And do you remember those care homes with the people sent into those care homes straight from hospital with COVID? Again, probably tens of thousands of people died in that first period because there wasn't sufficient protection around those very vulnerable, usually elderly people in care homes.
Well, Jack Sellers, you were advising Boris Johnson at the time, is that right?
I was, although just caveat that I wasn't explicitly advising him on COVID. I was dealing with more union-based stuff, but nonetheless, I was in government at the time when all this happened.
Was you going to the parties?
No, I wasn't going to the parties. No, not at all. But on the broader point of. Is it right that we have an inquiry? Absolutely, I think it's right that we have an inquiry. There could be another pandemic around the corner. It could be, no one knows, with a different virus, and we need to learn the lessons and adapt and improve on what we did wrong, or copy the stuff which we did well. So I think it's absolutely right. Did the government do well? I think at the moment you see a lot of criticism is benefiting from hindsight. I vividly remember the early days of the pandemic. I'd literally just started working for government in February 2020, and it was absolutely chaos. Like it was. I can't explain how chaotic it was. At the time, we remember there was no furlough scheme. We didn't know how the virus spread. We didn't know who it spread through. We didn't know who was more vulnerable. It was a bit of a crazy time, and. I think, in hindsight, everyone can forget that there was under a lot of pressure. So a lot of the criticisms we have today are over PPE or something, PPE contracts. But I remember the times where we were getting criticised daily because not enough PPE was getting to the front line. Probably a problem of successive governments, that there was not enough PPE in stock. But at the time, we needed to move quickly. We were under criticism.
Hang on, what? How is it the problem of who? That there was no PPE?
Well, I think there's been a lot of criticism that there was no pandemic, there was no preparation for a pandemic across government. I think that was quite widely accepted. I think Boris Johnson himself is on the record saying that government wasn't well prepared enough, and I think PPE is just one aspect of that, where we didn't have enough stock and when we didn't have enough supply chains of it. I think there was times where we were getting PPE airdropped in from China and stuff, from Airbus was supplying the government with it at some point. But so my point on that was just that we're getting criticised at the moment that contracts were sped up and they were given to different people and big, billion-pound contracts, etc. But at the time, everyone was completely, feral at the fact that there was nurses and doctors on the front line without the correct equipment to protect them from the virus. So we move quickly, and when you move quickly and you accelerate things, mistakes are going to be made. But I think at the moment now, everyone just forgets that was the case. But I think you do need to, take everything with a pinch of salt. Remember what it was like at the time.
Do you remember what it was like at the time at home? What are your thoughts from those early days? The areas of the inquiry, in case you're interested, the preparedness, that is point one that this inquiry is going to look at, the public health response, the response in the health and care sector, and our economic response. That's where they're going to be kind of lifting up everything, getting underneath all the nooks and crannies, apparently, to get answers about how effective and efficient the government response was. One of my concerns in all of this COVID situation, and I understand your points about the early days. In the very early days, it was all a bit unknown, a little bit frantic, all the rest of it, whatever. But as time was moving on, I think actually this country focused in microscopically just on COVID and did not pay attention to anything. Nothing else seemed to matter other than COVID. For me, as a layman, and it's easy to sit in an armchair and critique over the fence, to me, that feels fundamentally wrong. Does it to you? Do you think I'm even accurate in that? Do you think that we just microscopically focused on COVID and disregarded anything else?
I think there's some truth in that. I think that it was a chaotic government, and Boris Johnson's own personality, it was a bit of a sort of a personality cult-driven government, was that he could only think about one thing at a time personally, and the world around him could only revolve around one thing. I do agree that we sort of didn't see the big picture of all the different consequences of COVID at the time. The one that really sticks out for me was the impact on children. So the facts that, of course, we had to close the schools initially, but the fact that there wasn't a really good plan to help kids catch up who are still struggling now because of the consequences of schools closing 2 years ago, that is inexcusable.
Yeah, and to me, it wasn't even that we didn't focus on children. It's that, to me, no one seemed to care. People seemed to prioritise the well-being of adults over everything, quite frankly, to do with children. Adults that were able to take steps to protect themselves, these children became, sometimes to me anyway, almost felt like human shields. I think it's shameful what we did to a lot of our children. I personally wouldn't have had the schools closed a fraction of the time for which they were. He was just saying that Boris Johnson basically can only think of one thing at a time, and I saw your face then. Is he accurate or not?
I politely disagree with Andrew on that. Boris, not that he was focused on one issue at the time, but at the time, COVID as a whole was one big issue that he was completely focused on across the board. And look, this is Boris Johnson. He is like the biggest advocate of the free person you will ever meet. You literally ever meet. I think everyone can argue with that. But at the time, we were dealing with what Cabinet was dealing with was the advice put in front of us by Sage and others who have now, longer down the line, come under a bit more criticism by the advice. But at the time, you can only deal with the advice you're given based on this Sage was set up for this sort of very, very specific type of event. So you're going to listen to them and you're going to act on that information. But on the schools point, I think I'm not breaking any confidences in government at all by saying that was obviously an issue for the government because of Gavin Williamson lost his job in the end over. A lot of it was linked to these handling of the schools situation. But I remember the first days when the schools were locking down. We were talking about it in UK government. We hadn't sort of made any decisions yet. And then Nicola Sturgeon closed the schools, and then Mark Drakeford closed the schools. They announced it like half an hour apart, and then it was just, well, England's sort of left as a liar here, and everyone was criticising it, saying, "Oh, you don't care about children. We don't know what the impact on children is. Children are going to die because of your actions." All this sort of stuff. That's what it was like at the time. That was the criticism we were under. And the Sage evidence was saying that we needed a full lockdown, and leaving schools open at that point would have been just one chink in the armour.
But a year later, the government rejected the advice from its own advisor on school catch-up. So it refused to spend the money recommended helping children who had really struggled in that period to get, to catch up with where they should have been in their learning.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of government right now, and I've spoken to a lot of colleagues who, looking back, that would be, and this is what the COVID inquiry is set up to do, exactly, isn't it? Really, to look back at all these decisions, see which ones are the right ones, which ones we shouldn't do in future if this happens again. And I know a lot of colleagues, the school situation, the catch-up and the backlogs of that, the impact of that is one which they do look uncritical themselves. But I do think with with hindsight, it is a lot easier to judge these things.
But I think, for me personally, one of the things that one of my memories of COVID and one of my thoughts going forward with COVID is that you guys in Parliament at the time, so in Downing Street or whatever, to me, you didn't seem frightened of COVID. So what was being projected out on our screens day in, day out was COVID death tallies every single day at 5 o'clock or whatever it was. Look at how many people have died today. These big yellow fluorescent, these straps. Fear, 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 fear. Everyone absolutely terrified to leave their own house in case they go kill their own grandma. And then you guys in Downing Street, etc., just carrying on almost as normal. And what that did for me, and what it would do for me going forward as well, I wouldn't trust now. If someone was saying to me, now, Michelle, if you don't lock down, if you don't do this, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. I got the sense, with everything that we then subsequently learned, that you guys wasn't frightened. And if you guys wasn't frightened and you were closest to this data, then why should we have been?
I'm assuming, but here you're referring to the parties and stuff which came to light afterwards. You actually talked about working environment.
I'm talking about, it's now become evident that during a lot of this process, whilst we were being terrified at home, internally, within the working environments of the government, we know now, and I don't even like calling them parties, because they're not parties really, but there were gatherings, there were mass meetings. People were not afraid internally of COVID. That is my sense. Am I wrong?
I feel like I'm being interrogated as a part of SAGE or something here. But no, one thing, just for clarification here.
I'm not talking about SAGE. I'm talking about the people that was working in and around government at the time.
Yeah, no, let's separate two aspects here. On the parties, I'm not here. I wasn't, nothing to do with me. I wasn't at any of these things. So, it's not my place to say. And I think everyone's come out and said that they were wrong, blah, blah.
I'm not trying to get you done for being a party goer.
No, I know what you mean.
What I'm saying is, we were terrified by this government.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think the media, I think the way that so much of the media operated during this COVID was an absolute disgrace. And I think, actually, that if you want to investigate as part of all these goings on, you should look at how the media behaved in all of this, because none of this was challenged. All of it was just taken as granted and fed. It was all just fear narrative, fear narrative, fear narrative. And I think it was disgraceful. So what I'm saying to you, I'm not trying to pin you for being at a party that I don't even think was a party. I'm saying that what I feel, having seen what we've now seen, is that you guys internally, within government, within the corridors of power, were not afraid of COVID.
But there's two aspects to this. Government, this is the centre of government of one of the biggest economies in the world. I mean, people, during a pandemic, you're going to have to go to work and run the country. I can't expect people in number 10 to sit at home. And going just back to your point about this sort of fear narrative, I think you're just sounding a bit, I try to say this as respectfully as possible, but it sounds a bit more complacent about what the pandemic was and the impact that it's had. At the moment, we're having this COVID inquiry, could hundreds of thousands of people have died. This was a serious virus. This was killing people at mass rates across the country. Still is in many ways. Daily rates are quite high. I don't think it's completely fair to just say that act as if now looking back it was nothing to see here. On the government point, I know what you mean in terms of we were saying stay at home, but government needs to continue. You need people in these key departments and operations, not just in government, across Bank of England and other institutions, police forces, and etc., who need to go to work, these key workers, as we called them back then, they needed to be in work.
Yeah, this is only my view. I just think if my boss had apparently been in intensive care because of a virus that I didn't know much about, I probably would have been a little more apprehensive about gathering in the way, differently, I suppose, to what many people in and around Parliament seem to be at the time. That's just my take. I need to go to a break, but I can see you definitely...
Michelle, I just wanted to say this is why Boris Johnson had to go, because he undermined the credibility and the people around him of those essential public health messages. And they do mean that people don't trust the institutions as much as they did before Partygate.
Well, there you go. Oh, by the way, I didn't think I'd be talking about Partygate in a while. I just had to get that off my chest. I do apologise. Right, quick break now. When I come back, I want to talk to you about channel crossings. Don't go away. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewby, right through until 7 o'clock tonight, keeping me company, the former Special Advisor to Boris Johnson, and also to the Secretary of State for Wales, Jack Sellers, and Andrew Harrop, the General Secretary of the Fabian Society. Good evening again, gents. Now, let's cut to the chase. Channel crossing, Suella Braverman just been talking on the Conservative Party stage. She is talking very tough indeed. She reckons our asylum system is basically being abused. We've got immigration lawyer Robert Parkin live now on the line. Good evening to you. Is Suella right? Is our asylum system being abused?
No, it's being badly run, and it has been for at least the last decade, probably the last 2 decades.
So you're saying it's not been abused, the system basically isn't fit for purpose?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
So all of these people getting on the boats, seemingly being able to say pretty much anything and then ended up in hotels and all the rest of it. In your mind, they are people in need and we should be doing more to help them, not less.
No, I didn't say either of those things. What I'm suggesting is that those claims should be processed with competence and by grown adults. What's actually happened, and has been the case for certainly as long as I've been doing this job, has been the budget's been ripped out of the system to fund the latest ridiculous vanity project, which is exactly what the Home Secretary is proposing to carry on doing. And that means that applications aren't being decided in anything like the time that the government wants it to be decided in. It means that people who are abusing the system don't face enforcement because the budget for enforcement has been slashed to the bones. And the whole thing's collapsed, and that's been the case certainly for the past decade.
OK, Robert Parkin, I think there's a slightly tricky line, so just for that reasons, we'll leave it there. But thank you very much for your time. Where do you stand on this?
I think the idea of saying that anyone who comes to this country, except through an authorised route, should go to Rwanda or wherever is just... It's immoral and it's probably illegal as well.
Right, so that's fascinating. So what should she do about it then? Because everyone's saying how awful all these plans are and all the rest of it, but what's the answer then?
So these are people fleeing sanctuary from usually war-torn countries like Syria. They can't go back.
They're fleeing France.
And that is the point. If we had good relations with other European countries, I would totally support us sending them back to France or Italy, wherever they first got to a safe country. But our relationships with the rest of Europe have reached such a low point. I can't imagine any Conservative government being able to negotiate an agreement with our friends elsewhere in Europe so that we fairly share out the burden of asylum seekers.
But I don't understand what you mean, because we have a relationship, for example, with France. We have such a relationship with them that they've taken tens of millions of our pounds. Your pounds, my pounds, taxpayers' pounds, in order to try and apparently stop this, to stop these people getting on the boat. Suella Braverman today saying that only about 50% of those crossings have actually been stopped. So we do have that relationship, that cooperation, and it's not working.
I believe that France is stopping quite a number of
50%, apparently.
But the point is, if we were either in the European Union or we had an effective relationship where we could do sensible deals that benefited both sides with other European countries, we could sort this problem, at least minimise it massively compared to where it is. We don't. We have a dysfunctional relationship with our friends, and therefore we're failing to control these huge numbers.
They're in France, and they obviously don't want to be there. So whether we're best friends or in the European Union or not, they don't want to be in France, or else they would be staying there.
Usually it's because they have family or a community that can welcome them into this country. Whatever the reasons they've chosen to come to the UK, we have a moral and legal obligation to protect people fleeing sanctuary, fleeing these war-torn conditions. They are victims. There are a tiny number of people who are playing the system, but almost all the people who come to this country are in genuine need.
Where do you stand, Jack?
Politely disagree, Andrew, and I haven't got as a bluey-eyed sort of view on what the EU nations can potentially do to help us on this. I don't think they've been helpful to date, even pre-2016, on any of these sort of illegal immigration issues. But what I do find frustrating is that the Rwanda policy was announced months ago now. When I was even working in government, it was announced months ago. I think personally, it's not. Of course, it's not the best. I don't think it's the best solution, but it was the only solution. There was no solution sort of coming up. Labour and etc. didn't come up with any alternatives, so we put in place this. But with all the flack that it's getting at the moment, and it still hasn't actually even been operated. I don't think a single flight has even taken off yet because of all the legal issues. So what I imagine Suella's trying to do today is close all the loopholes to allow that to happen. But in the meantime, I don't think anyone who's against illegal immigration and cutting down on it, I don't think anyone would say, no, I'm against a specific clause to a deal with the EU where they take them all back. I don't think anyone would say no to that. I don't think anyone prefers the Rwanda option, but at the moment, the Rwanda option was one of the only ones coming to the table. Well,
the Rwanda option was a deterrent. That was the whole point. It was supposed to be a deterrent, and as a deterrent, I personally think it was a good idea.
My understanding of the change announced today is that rather than just being single men being threatened with deportation to Rwanda, it's going to be women and children as well. That just seems, just completely beyond the pale.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was that. And I would, if there are indeed women and children that really do need sanctuary, then of course, who wouldn't want to give it that? Many of my viewers, however, will be yelling. I know my viewers by now. You'll be yelling at your screens. You will be yelling, I am sure, to Suella to just get on and do something, Suella, saying it is a chronic problem now. I don't think, though. We've got the answers still. Do you? Lawrence Fox is up at 7 o'clock. Lawrence, good evening. What have you got for us?
Good evening, Dewbs. Well, this evening we've got a good show. We've got a world-exclusive interview with the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. We talk Liz Truss, King Charles, and making England great again.
Ooh, making England great again, or Britain, or...
But mega sounds better than mabugger.
Oh, OK. Well, we shall be tuning in for that, Lawrence Fox. Thank you very much. Right, gentlemen, that is all we've got time for. Thank you very much for your company. Sorry about your party grilling there. Some things, guys, I can't help it. I do have to just get off my chest. Have yourself a fantastic evening, and I will see you tomorrow.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. A wet and windy start to Wednesday. A pretty mild start as well. Temperatures won't be falling too far overnight as we see further cloud and rain coming in. This little area of low pressure is developing as it approaches the UK, and that's going to spark the wet and windy conditions for most come tomorrow morning. That rain really picking up at the moment across parts of Northern Ireland. It's going to be a pretty wet night here, but that rain also extending north across Scotland, and we'll see further outbreaks of rain through the night across Wales. Parts of northern England as well, but much of the south and east of England will stay dry, but everywhere it's going to be pretty windy, fairly cloudy, and that all adds up to a very mild night with temperatures certainly in the south staying in the teens and double digits further north. But it will be a wet and windy start to Wednesday across much of northern Britain and down across Wales. Heavy bursts of rain, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Everything being buffeted by those strong winds as well. There are Met Office yellow warnings in place. The rain across the east will arrive late morning.